Hello everybody. Penelope and I are back. What do you say, Penelope? Are you ready to get started? You're going to be bashful today, huh? So let's talk about the self, and we're going to open right up into your homework assignment. So, and what I've done is I've lettered each slide to correspond to one of the questions in the homework assignment. The homework assignment is also an individual, not a group assignment. This is a lecture on the self, right? So this is about you. At least that's the intent. I had a student years ago. It's getting to be years ago now. That her signature line on her email struck me, and it was the best way to find yourself is to live yourself in the service of others. And what a great quote, right? So let's kick it off. Here we go, talking about the self, lecture module 3, whatever you want to call it. So I want you to begin with the 10-statement test, and this is a pretty ancient test in psychology. So let's try it, right? And this could, be in your journal, but certainly for the assignment, answer the question, who am I? By completing at least 10 statements beginning with the words I am, and then move on, right? So you maybe want to pause right now, pause this, sit back, reflect, and make your list, right? And then make each answer different, right? We don't want any duplicates. That doesn't really serve us all that well, right? And then what you're going to do is fill this out on your homework, right? And this will be to turn in. So you see the 10-statement test entry and then the category, right? The satisfaction level that you derive from that self and the importance of that self to you. So I might, say, well, I'm a cat owner, right? And I am a cat owner, and what category would that be in? Well, let's take a look on the next slide. We'll look at that. Satisfaction level. Most of the time I'm very happy being a cat owner, unless they're barfing and I have to clean it up or some such, and then my satisfaction level might go down. Importance is pretty high. I identify significantly with my cats, and my relationship with them is extremely important to me. So that could be quite important. I want to shift the lights here a little bit and maybe make that a little better. I don't know. So, example answer categories then. I am. Answers usually fall into one of the 4 categories. So you return to your list that you've gotten written down, right? And, I am tall. So that would be a physical description, right? I'm a husband, which is I'm a husband, right? And that's very important to me. That would be a social role. I am witty. Not necessarily, but I mean that would be an example, right? That would be a character trait. And then existential or abstract statements. I'm seeking the meaning of life. Might be an existential statement. So go with that, right? And this is, notice, as we move through this homework, I've got each slide lettered so you can kind of follow along. So the first part of the assignment, right, was A. So we've just discussed A. I'll alert you when we get to B. So we're going to talk about various aspects in here. I'm not going to belabor that. Oh my God, right away, here we are at slide B, and which wellness dimensions are most closely tied to yourself. So here you record the 9 wellness dimensions, and then I'd like you to rank order them. So this is kind of get you in touch. We've already talked about the wellness dimensions, so let's talk about you, the story of you, and what's important to you. So go ahead, and if you want to pause and do that now, or if you want to come back to it, obviously your choice. Now let's talk about a little bit about individualistic and collectivist cultures. Individualistic cultures, right, define themselves abstractly with traits quite often, and the choices on a 10-statement test often reflect independence, right? Whereas if we do the 10-statement test in collectivist cultures, such as China, some of Latin America, the Middle East, etc., people tend to describe themselves using concrete attributes and social categories, and these tend to emphasize interdependence. And you see these 2 diagrams, right? In a collectivist culture, the self is really embedded in the relationships with others, father, mother, friend, right, co-workers, siblings. Whereas in an independent, we have very kind of little embedding. Now, obviously, there's individual differences, but culturally, this is kind of the way it works. Now, let's take a look then at 10-statement test results, right? Well, not 10 statement test results, but what's important right? And what's important to you. And we see for Americans, freedom, independence, self-reliance, equality, individualism, competition, efficiency, time, directness, right? But then go to Japan, which is a vastly different culture. And remember, I heard when I was growing up, Japan described to me as a country the size of California, but with the population of the United States. So people do have to live in a more compact environment, right? And collectivist cultures often favor that. So what do we see? Well, for the Japanese, what's important? Belonging, group harmony, collectiveness, age, seniority, group consensus, cooperation versus competition, quality, patience, indirectness as opposed to directness, go-between. Note that these important qualities to the Japanese, there's not one that overlaps in the top 10 with Americans. And if we look at people in the Middle East, right, family security, family harmony, parental guidance, age, authority, compromise, devotion, patience, indirectness, hospitality. So we see that culture has a profound effect on shaping who we are, not only shaping who we are, but shaping what we believe to be important, right? Now, as the last slide said, and where we're moving, it's, in the United States, for Americans, it's basically your life story, and you're most responsible for writing it. In collectivist cultures, we may give over some of the authorship to the people who surround us. So, let's talk about your biography then. If someone were writing a story about your life, right, what kind of story would it be as your life is now? What kind of mood would the overall story have, right? Would it be an action adventure, maybe a romance? Could it be a drama? Oh, let's hope it's not a horror story, right? Or a tragedy. Is it a tearjerker? Probably not one of the most favored tones of a story that we would like, right? What kind of story would you like it to be, though? Because how it's written now doesn't necessarily mean that's how it has to be over time. So you can imagine whatever kind of story sounds fun. Would it be an action adventure, romance, drama, horror? I'm really yearning for a travel log. I mean, I'd like to do the travel thing. We are kind of homebound, and it's been tough on a lot of us. I am really looking forward to the day when we can travel again, and when Americans are welcome in other countries. What kind of character would you be in this story? Are you a victim, the hero, the martyr, an opportunist? Sniffing out opportunities and making the most of them? Are you a powerful executive, right? A psychic advisor, perhaps, right? So, again, explore these ideas. And then list some things that other people have told you that you should have to do, like go to college, get married, fight if someone insults you. And again, this can make for a decent journal entry, or you can just kind of think on it. But and we'll get to this idea of woulda, shoulda, coulda a little later in the lecture. So these stories that we live by, right? We create identity through story making and story living. Another term for this is very popular is the narrative of your life, right? Or the scripts that you operate under. So that is, you write your own life story and make it real by living it. And this is very much a Western point of view, very individualistic. Notice this has got a high self-focus. Every personal myth has a pervasive tone, right? Hopeless pessimism, insecurity, boundless optimism, if you will, tragedy. So these characterize the story. So what kind of story would your life be now, right? This is the pervasive tone of your life, and it can be usually broken down into optimistic or pessimistic. Forward-looking with anticipation and a certain joy, or forward-looking and kind of an anxiety about what could occur. And it's a tough time for all of us. We've had to make some serious adjustments. COVID is essentially a 100-year phenomenon, as it is before. The flu pandemic of 1918, right, really altered the way people lived and gave us serious adjustment challenges, as it has for many of us now, right? So is it easy to be hard? Is it hard to be optimistic for some people now? Maybe it's easier to be pessimistic given our current circumstance. So The stories we live by then, and this is then go to part C of your assignment. What kind of story then? What kind of character would you be? Fancy word for this is your imago. This is the idealized you, the heroine of your story, the hero in the context that showcases your best imago. So go ahead and you can kind of fill out part C of your homework as you choose as well. Now, explanatory styles, when we look at this, tendency to use similar causal explanations for a wide variety of events in somebody's life. So I happen to be an optimist. I attribute setbacks to external, unstable, specific factors, and that allows me a greater sense of control, because if it's a specific factor, I can locate it and probably use some form of coping, hopefully problem-focused coping, right, to correct the situation. And I have the belief that I can do that for the most part. What does this do? Well, it leads to approach tendencies. That is, if I see a problem, I may be more willing to view that problem as a challenge for me to approach and work through, to overcome, to test my mettle, if you will, right? When we have kind of a pessimistic overall point of view, then we tend to look at setbacks as something internal that's relatively unchangeable, that is stable, and it's often global factors that pervade all aspects or contexts of a person's life. And often this then fosters passivity, and people become avoidant rather than approach-oriented. So when there's a challenge, people then maybe shy away from that challenge because pessimistically they view unlikely to successfully meet, conquer, or kind of opportunize, if you like that word, that challenge. Right, Penelope? All right. So let us shift gears just a tad. I want to talk about William James, and William James wrote Principles of Psychology back in 1890. Yep. And many of the chapters are still relevant today in this book, and he has a chapter on the self. So let's spend a moment or two with James and look at James' conception of the self. He splits the self really into two selves, but even more than that perhaps. But let's focus on the two. The me is the self that's known. It's the empirical ego. And what does this mean then? This is the sum total of all that you can call yours, right? So it's the material me. It's all your possessions, your clothing, etc. It's the social you and how you relate to others and the nature of your relationship with others. And then it's the spiritual me that's how you connect to something larger than yourself, if one does that at all, right? But these are the kind of the observable characteristics of who we are, or the things that we can explain about ourselves. Now, James said that there's some inherent kind of instinctual aspects of approaching the self, and people tend to, when not suffering pathology, have a self-appreciation. That is a certain level of self-appreciation or self-admiration. Now, obviously, this is an individual difference variable that varies across people, but on average, people tend to have a pretty strong self-appreciation. Okay. We often want information about the self, so we self-seek information from others especially, and others provide us with feedback on how we're doing, let's say in a sense of a relationship. We also have self-preservation, that is, we seek to protect ourselves, right? And this can be physically protect ourselves from injury, but also we protect our views of ourselves. So someone has napped and is now very energetic. Okay, so who knows all this about the self, though? And this is a fantastic question that has troubled philosophers, thousands of years ago. And William James comes in, and as others, he's answered it pretty neatly and pretty simply. That is, the I is the one who has awareness of the me. So the I is the knower, because you say, well, how do I know this about myself? Well, that's one thing. How do I know about this about myself? Because I can observe these things. But who's doing the knowing and who's doing the observing? And then if we move into a period of self-evaluation, who is evaluating my behavior? Well, that's the I. So the me is this being, this corporeal kind of mover within the environment. But my awareness of myself is the I. So you can see how William James bifurcates it. What? So pretty interesting. Now, does Penelope have this split? Obviously, humans have self-awareness, have this consciousness that develops, right, begins developing in infancy and really takes hold in toddlerhood. But then we look at a feline species. Does she have self-awareness? Or does she just operate in the moment the whole time throughout her existence, right? And you know, kind of an interesting idea. And I think for the most part, you know, she's a me, and that's it. And there's not a lot of I there. She operates in the moment according to her needs, desires, drives, emotions at the time, right? Maybe a little different than people in that regard. I don't know if she doesn't seem insulted by this, so I don't think she has any big objections. Right? So let's talk about the physical self then. It's the psychological sense of one's physical being, one's height, weight, hair color, ethnicity, physical skills, and this has, you know, an effect on the opportunities, the affordances that maybe we approach, but also maybe the things we avoid. Permanent traits require adjustment, right? So a lot of times problem-focused coping really isn't on the table in this regard. My height, you know, I grew to 5'8". I'm a short man. That's the way that goes, and I better learn to adjust to that because it's not going to change, right? I mean, I guess I could wear lifts or something in my shoes and pretend to be taller, but ultimately I'm 5'8", and maybe the best approach to that is suck it up and get used to it. You know, maybe I could hang from a bar and stretch my spine and gain another ½ inch or so, but I don't think it really helps or makes a difference, right? Now, sex and physical sex we see is kind of an interesting issue now because maybe that can be changed, right? Now, race or ethnicity, I prefer the word ethnicity to race because race doesn't exist as a concept. These can be linked to my self-esteem, and one of the best ways to go here is self-acceptance. I am who I am, and that's who I am, and I'm Popeye the Sailor Man, right? Or some such. Quincy, what are you doing down there? We're getting just bombarded today here, I guess. Other traits such as weight, fitness, hairstyle can be modified. So again, the aspects of ourself that maybe we're dissatisfied with that we can change, then maybe we should go ahead and change them, right, as an adjustment strategy. But there's some that we just can't change, and I think acceptance is the way to go. Note how we're going to go through this course, and we're going to continue to return to a very central idea, that is problem-focused versus emotion-focused coping. Some situations afford us the potential for action. Others, really, the action is in changing how we feel about it if the need presents itself. Now, the social community self, this is the composite of the roles you play. So you might be a suitor that is looking for someone to enter into a relationship with. You might, I would assume many of you are students, like all of you, right? Husband, wife, mother, and some of you have stepped into these roles already. Some of these roles are still off in the distant future, right? You might be a citizen, a leader, a follower, so on. There's a myriad of roles that we can experience, and it's the composite of those that really comprise the social self. Roles and masks are adaptive responses to a social situation. So we come into a new situation, we might see what roles are available and then select the role in which we want to participate, often a role in which we're most comfortable. Sometimes we have to step into roles that are less comfortable because the situation demands it, right? But if our entire life is lived behind masks, right, it may be difficult to discover the true inner self. Core component to this course, especially when we get into personality, next lecture, right, we're going to talk about core components of the self. We're going to talk about authenticity as an existential point of view, right? And we're going to learn this term called being in the world, and that's understanding who we are and being honest about that. Now, the occupational self. I've been reading some fascinating work. I was reading Paul Tillich's book and to brush up on my existential psychology philosophy specifically for this course. And in the United States, I think one of the most core selves that our culture has kind of wedded us to is our occupation and our occupational status, right? And it can be a source of status, fulfillment, meaning making. What am I about? What do I do? Well, for me, I'm a teacher, and I'm a teacher. I'm super schematic for being a teacher. That's a very important self, a central self. And what does it mean? Well, I'm trying to help the world by helping people become better critical thinkers so they can make better choices for themselves, whatever those choices are, right? I don't want to be an authoritarian and tell people what to think. I'd like to be an instructor that helps people come to what they think and come to their view of themselves more naturally and more critically, right? Student debt, part of the occupational self, right? Frustration and failure might be a component of the occupational self. We lose a job. It can be devastating in that regard. We can experience success as a result of our occupational self. Money, loss, retirement, or job change. These are all components. And then the personal self. And this is your private, continuous sense of being yourself, oneself in the world, and what you derive from that. So it includes your values, your ethics, your name, right? Your self-concept, self-esteem, self-worth. Ethics simply defined as standards of behavior. So let's stop here. We're going to go to part 2.